Now we're going to get into the tools. Oh, that is different when you talk up close to the mic. We're going to get into the tools that different jurisdictions are using to improve energy efficiency in existing residential buildings. So our next speaker is Mike Grimm, and he came up all the way from Southern California. He's from the city of Carlsbad, and he's going to talk about their climate action plan and energy efficiency ordinances. So please join me in welcoming Mike.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thanks to Bayrin for inviting me up here. We in the San Diego area have been watching what all the energy policy and programs that's been going on in the Bay Area for quite some time. So I'm honored to be part of this panel because we've been watching you guys, and so now you want to hear about what we're doing. That's great. Plus, it gives me a day in San Francisco out of the office, so thank you. I'm going to just do a little bit of a background about Carlsbad itself, the Climate Action Plan, then talk about how we developed our ordinance, talk about a major revelation that happened once we did our cost effectiveness study. It completely shifted the direction we were going with our ordinance. Talk about some of the implementation strategies, public outreach, and then some key takeaways as far as REACH code development is concerned. So for those of you that may not have gotten down there before, Carlsbad's located about 30 miles north of San Diego. It's a coastal community, about 115,000 people, 40 square miles. We've got about 46,000 dwelling units, and it's mostly a single-family area. If you ever do wander down there, this is my visitor bureau pitch. Come on and visit Legoland. We've also got beautiful flower fields, and of course the beach. So we got about 7 miles of beach. So come on down. So our climate action plan or actually the energy efficiency ordinance is stemmed out of our climate action plan. It was adopted with our a comprehensive general plan update in 2015. Got a number of measures and actions, pretty typical for climate action plans developed in that era. The strategy areas were energy efficiency, renewable energy, transportation, water, and then also public outreach and education. Notably, we have adopted ordinances in 3 of those areas. We've done energy efficiency, solar photovoltaic, alternative water heating, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and transportation demand management. So if you'd like to speak about any of those other ones offline or after the forum, I'd be happy to chat with you about those. So as far as our energy efficiency goals for residential, you can see it there, 50% reduction and 30% of the dwelling units by 2035. 2 actions for that. Promoting energy efficiency and then adopting an ordinance requiring energy efficiency. Now, importantly, when we were developing our CAP, most of the CAPs back then were saying encourage, promote, just put the word out there and people will naturally say, well, this makes sense, I'm going to go ahead and do it. Along about the same time, the County of San Diego was processing their climate action plan, and they'd been litigated by Sierra Club and others. They lost in that litigation. They lost in the appeal of that litigation. And then that group turned to us and said, you're next. So all of a sudden, our draft cap that said promote stuff was revised to say mandate stuff. And that was the development of our ordinances. It was pretty much we had to do it, otherwise we were going to get stuck in litigation, which is always a great incentive, I guess. So what we did was I want to send a shout out to, we were developing a bunch of other ordinances at the time, as I mentioned. But we worked with our local IOU, SDG&E, and they have an Emerging Cities program. And because of that's based on energy efficiency, they funded our entire energy ordinance development, which was fantastic, a very, very, very kind thing for them to do. The work was conducted by Center for Sustainable Energy. The scope of the work is pretty typical for what you see for ordinances. See who else is doing what out there. Try and figure out how you can localize that, what's going to really fly in your jurisdiction, start talking about who's going to have to do what are they going to have to do, and such like that. Then we went into the ordinance development and the CEC cost effectiveness process, which pretty much drove this entire process for all of our ordinances. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then they also designed a public outreach and education program. We took all the ordinances forward together, so it's just one big cluster of ordinances. So we were talking to a lot of different sectors at all at once. So the cost effectiveness study, once again, because we were doing energy efficiency in residential buildings in climate zone 7, which is incredibly temperate, we caught the attention of the statewide codes and standards program. Frontier Energy and Misty Braseri, thankfully, very much so, funded, I think, through PG&E, took the Chico study, if you've seen that, and expanded it to entirely statewide, which was great for us. We realized, though, in Climate Zone 7, it's incredibly temperate. You could probably sleep outside most of the year. So trying to reduce energy consumption in those buildings was not cost effective in a lot of the standard things that we just heard from last speaker. So that totally changed our strategy, and I'll get into that a little bit. So here's the basic ordinance requirements. We settled on 5 different measures. Water heating includes just wrapping your hot water pipes and the exposed hot water pipes and your hot water heater, doing some low flow fixtures. The lighting package is essentially changing out lamps and doing motion sensor switches. And then for the older buildings, we actually did get into, duct sealing, attic insulation, and cool roofs and stuff. Importantly, as you can see there, only a third of our housing stock was built prior to 1978. So when you talk about the applicability of these, the ones that are really going to get some energy efficiency reductions, greenhouse gas reductions, are those 3 that are lower in the chart, and they're not really applying to hardly any buildings. Also importantly, about 40% of our buildings were built after 1991. So they're relatively new, they're relatively energy efficient. And so we started looking at this and said, well, how are we actually going to get some kind of energy efficiency going in these buildings for significant greenhouse gas reductions? So what we decided was, about the same time that we were doing this, our communications department decided that they were going to be doing a behavior mod kind of experiment. They were actually going to send out some surveys and talk to some people about what they knew about home energy use. Would they be willing to have a home energy coach come into their house and look through their energy bills and talk to them about that? Ask them, hey, is one room cool when the other room's hot? Do your kids have allergies? Indoor air quality, that whole kind of concept about education. The surveys came back, and most folks said, yes, I know about my energy, but you can tell by the answers on the other questions they probably didn't, but they resoundingly said that they did not want a stranger coming into their house to talk to them about their energy stuff. That was just too intrusive. So right then, our behavior mod as far as home energy efficiency kind of went out the window. And then at the same time, we're developing our ordinance, which says that you can mandate people change out their bulbs and wrap their pipes, but you're not really going to get a whole lot of GHG out of that. So we put those 2 together, and we said, you know what, we're going to focus on this being an educational opportunity. If someone comes in for a building permit, we're going to grab them. We're going to see that as an opportunity where we can go out and actually talk to them, force them to get some kind of home energy coaching. So just taking a little step back, as far as the applicability, our ordinance said major renovation, and we already had on the books that if you had a building permit valuation over $60,000, you needed to get a coastal development permit in the coastal zone. It was also about the same area, same threshold where you were subject to school fees. So we figured we're just going to use an existing threshold, trying to keep the ordinance to change as little as possible with regard to processing and such. And I've got a list if you'd like to see it. When you get to about $60,000 building permit valuation, you're getting into some additions, some pretty substantial remodels. It's not you're slapping up a porch in the backyard and all of a sudden now you have to go in and do energy efficiency inside. But as far as the educational opportunity, so we said what we were going to do is try and incentivize folks to opt for that home energy assessment. So we offered an exemption. We said you'd be exempt from changing out your light bulbs and switches, which you may have already done and it wouldn't cost you anything hardly to do. So we realized that exemption for a home energy assessment wasn't really maybe enough of incentive. So we decided that we'd develop a program that the city would sponsor that home energy assessment. So if you come in for a building permit application and we say, hey, you're subject to the ordinance, then we'll give you a list of approved certified Department of Energy home energy score assessors. You choose one of those, you call them up, you get an assessment. If you score 7 or higher, which probably likely some of these newer buildings would, then you're exempt from the ordinance, you're fine. But what we did was we are requiring that home energy score assessor, rather than just walk through, gather the data, and leave, they actually have to sit down and do some additional coaching. We're going to have energy efficiency materials and instruction to let the homeowner know that, hey, there's a whole house system here, those kinds of things. And then also we're asking them to perform a survey right off the bat to say, was this really an experience? Did you learn anything from it? And then they have to sign an agreement for this service because we are giving public funds to help, a homeowner. They have to sign an agreement that says in a year, we'll contact them again and they'll complete another survey and we'll say, hey, that education that you got a year ago, did that make a difference? Did you actually go out and maybe take the recommendations of that home energy coach program and home energy score and actually implement some of those measures? Did you talk to your neighbors about it? Did you, actually get the word out? Is this really a viable education process? Because I think in your jurisdictions, in ours, when we mapped out our residential PV, there were just these clusters all over, and you can tell like one or two neighbors got PV, said it was the best thing since sliced bread, and next thing you know, it just spread over the whole community. And likewise, in some areas there was kind of a pocket of PV, and that was probably exactly the opposite. One person had a negative experience with a contractor or whatever, said this isn't worth doing, and then next thing you know, word got out. So we really want to use this energy efficiency ordinance as an opportunity to get in there and actually maybe start doing some behavior change. Because, like I said, the direct improvements aren't really going to get the results that we were looking for. So here's some of you or most of you may be familiar with the Department of Energy Home Energy Score. It's a really easy report. This is the front page of the report. It's easy for the plan checkers at the building front counter. If someone submits the report and says, "Here, I got a 3," so I guess I'm subject to the ordinance. I'm not exempt. It also has a number of pages. I've got a copy. Excuse me. I've got a copy of one in the back if you'd like to see it. And then it gives you some recommendations and talks about the energy savings and the cost savings you can get out of those. So we did do some public outreach for this, and as you should for all ordinances, but it was clustered with a bunch of the other ordinances. One of the key things we did, though, is we mailed to all the past permit applicants that had ever pulled a residential building permit in the city of Carlsbad for the last couple of years to make sure those contractors knew about this was going on, and because those are the folks that are actually talking to the homeowners and those that are going to get the word out. We met with the BIA. We met with local developers. Notices up at the building department front permit counter, press releases, and then we had a dedicated web page that had all of the ordinances on there, and I have a link for that if you're interested in taking a look at that. Interestingly enough, and I think probably because this was clustered with the other ordinances, big PV and water heating and EV charging, didn't get a lot of traction, and a lot of people just didn't seem that it was like, okay, fine, if you're going to give me a free assessment, okay, I'll take it. So some key takeaways. It is really helpful to include the mandate for your REACH code in the policy document. When we were going out there talking to folks, it was easier for me to say the decision on whether or not we're doing an ordinance has already been made. Council adopted the climate action plan that included in there you're doing an ordinance. Now it's just a matter of what it's going to look like, who's it going to apply to, et cetera, et cetera. Consulting early with the Codes and Standards team. I do backflips thanking the Codes and Standards team for all the work that they did and all the help that they gave us. We had no idea how to do REACH codes, and it was just amazing help. And if you've ever, I'm sure most of you know the Local Energy Codes website. If you're thinking about it, got a link on here on the next slide. Go ahead and look at that and shop around. They're getting a lot of REACH codes up and down California, and you can kind of shop and see who's doing what, and maybe that give you some ideas about what your local jurisdiction can do. Be flexible and creative. Once again, as I mentioned, we're screaming forward with, we're going to make people do air sealing and attic insulation and all this great stuff, and boy, oh boy, and then all of a sudden, slam. It's not cost effective. Wanted it. So make sure you're flexible and creative. And actually, I would even say engage and shout out also to the EC staff. They were fantastic. Dialogue between us and the Codes and Standards team and just trying to develop that ordinance and just bouncing ideas off of and figuring it out. So all these folks are out there to help you, and I'm taking advantage of that. The cost effectiveness study, it's lengthy. Once again, it's a semi-arduous process. Admittedly, it's very complicated. It really helps with your outreach. When the folks came in and pushed back and said, "This is too much. You're overreaching," we just hold it up and go, "Hey, it's cost effective." But then on the other side, when the environmental advocates said, "Hey, you guys aren't going far enough. You need to go further," we said, "We can't go any further," having a defensible ordinance. So it lets you find that happy spot in there. Coordinating early with permit processing. Any of you folks that have worked the front counter know very well that's very, very important to do. Think about implementation up front. You can design an ordinance that suits your needs, but then it's going to be difficult to plan check. It's going to be difficult to explain, all those other kinds of things. And then, most importantly, maintaining enthusiasm. There's going to be bumps along the road, and unless you're an advocate and you're a cheerleader for it, and you maybe find someone in the building department or other find the cheerleader for it, keep pushing forward, because it's sometimes seems like pushing a big rock up. And I wanted to give one more shout out to the codes and standards folks that are here. I used to work at the planning front counter, and so every now and then, someone would come in with an engineering question. I could go over there and find the standards and show them the engineering standards. That makes sense. And someone come over for the building question, no one's in the building counter, and I'd walk over and go, "Oh yeah, this is just another code. Oh, let me pull it." And I'd look and go, I have no idea how to tell this person what to do with this code. And then to try and figure out when you're actually amending that code, what sections of that code you need to amend and how to get to where you want to do is incredibly complex. So I have a renewed and enhanced appreciation for all the stuff that you guys do with the building codes. And thank you very much for everything you're doing. Oh, and here's some links and stuff like that. Cool.
Thank you, Mike. And who has a question for Mike? Okay. Thank you. I was wondering if you've been have been made as a result of this, and
so the code we just were approved by the CEC in August, so we're just now getting it going. But as far as data collection, that's a great point, because when we're talking about the permit processing, we use the InterGov system for tracking, and so what we did was we actually put in the software, when you're loading up the permits, a certain tab that you have to fill out and complete, and then the permit can't be issued unless all that information. So we're going to be able to grab that data, run reports really easily. So thinking about that, but it's really important. Think about monitoring and how you're going to monitor the success. You got to set up those systems and structures early.
Other questions? Okay. Jennifer.
Are there any provisions to redo the home energy score after a renovation triggering those upgrades to?
We don't have any provisions as of yet. We really tried to stay away from. We were thinking about time of sale disclosures and other kinds of things like that, and we just stayed away from the private side. Yeah.
Other questions? Do we have anything on the webinar? Nope. Okay. Oh.
Good to see you. Hal Nelson with Portland State University. And this is a follow-up on some other good stuff going on in the Southland. But as far as getting out the word, we did a project with Southern California Edison where we created a competition between apartment complexes to do energy conservation. And that followed up by on some mass scale benchmarking that we did to make it really easy for the customers to get the energy data. And so we've scaled this now for the municipality. So if you think this is something you might be interested in, I'll be in.
Great, thanks,
Al. Yeah, is there any financing available that's able to help homeowners?
So part of that coaching, that additional coaching I was talking about that the assessor has to do, is they need to let them know about the SDG&E rebates and incentives that are available. Let them kind of inform them about Energy Upgrade California, this kind of thing. The city doesn't directly have any rebate or incentive programs. And
work with the PACE program?
We do have PACE programs, yes. We've got several in town, and so that would be another option for them to. because PACE residential financing is a little different than the commercial. And then we're not a local government partner with SDG&E, so we have to leverage our local council of government. SANDAC is any programs that we do, that we want to customize or anything, we have to leverage through them. Yeah.
Or for those of you that don't know, that is offered through BayREN, and we've had incredible uptake throughout.
Hi, Mike. We talked about this a little bit, but I think it might be good for some of the jurisdictions to know about how the assessor component worked, if it was private market folks or if the city hired anybody.
Right. So we sent out an RFQ, and it's still out there. It's kind of an open-ended RFQ. Anybody, any comer or taker, if you're qualified, come see us, and then we'll interview you and get you on the approved list. So they would all be private contractors or inspectors. We did have a couple of our own building inspectors interested in doing it. So they worked with personnel, and they said, so if they're performing a home energy score assessment, it's as if they're working. So that's the city's sponsored side. And then Center for Sustainable Energy is the DOE sponsor for the home energy score program in San Diego. And what CSE is noticing is that a lot of folks come because they're interested in it. But then the one question they say, well, before I go get certified and do all that work, is there a market out there? Is anyone actually really doing it? And so we're hoping that our city-sponsored program is going to show them that, yes, there will be a market. A couple other jurisdictions are actually looking at it. And if this goes well with just the building permit applicants, because we're calling this a pilot, if this goes well with the building permit applicants, we're going to probably go back to management and leadership and say, let's expand this as a service for everybody. I mean, they're relatively cheap, a couple $300 a pop, and if you can really if we have some data after this to show that it's actually affecting change, getting those existing buildings that we can't through mandates, it has to be all voluntary, then yeah, we'll expand.
How do you deal with low-income households? Are there any specific programs that assist them specifically?
Yeah, so we have only a relatively small sector of the community that qualifies by the state definition of low-income household. That's all because they're, their property values are high because it's been a legacy property, but their income is low. We also have some, because of our inclusionary housing, we have some low-income communities there. So we haven't done anything expressly that way. I think that would probably be, we are going to be doing a climate action plan update probably next year, and I think that would be a separate program where we would identify that rather than this as a building permit application. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mike.